Okay, let's go to the manuscript evidence. Now, what Muslims will say is that the Quran has never changed. They will say that the Quran is exactly, this book here is the same, the Arabic part, not the English, the Arabic part is exactly the same that has always existed in heaven. In Surah 85, Ayah 22.
Oh, so not just for 1400 years.
Oh, this has always existed.
Okay.
Surah 85, Ayah 22 is the verse they point to. And that verse says, for the preserved tablet. Now, any exegete, any scholar, any commentator on that verse, whether they Tabari or Zamakhshari, Suyuti, Al-Badawi, any of them, they all say that Surah 85, Ayah 22 refers to those tablets that have always existed. They're preserved, that means they have never been created. So it's the uncreated Quran that has always existed in heaven. Now that's problematic. You can see, I see why you're questioning that suddenly, because that seems to commit shirk, does it not? It now submits that there is something that coexists with God that's outside of him, because how can a tablet be God? We'll get to that in another talk, because that's problematic in and of itself. Nonetheless, what they would say is this book has always existed. So what Gabriel did, all he did from that period of 610 to 632, that 22-year period, he then sent down portions of it at a time. The Meccan material, which is the latter part, this part, the second part, from 610 to 622, and the Medinan, which would be this first part, from 622 to 632, the last 10 years of his life. So that this compilation was then sent down over a period of 22 years. Now, that's what Muslims say. The difficulty with that is they say that therefore everything that Muhammad was given was written down. When Muhammad died, this had not yet been written down.
Wow.
There was no text that had been written down. It had been memorized by many of his companions. Parts of it had been written on stones, on bones, on bark. We do know that. That's well documented in Al-Bukhari.
It was scattered almost.
It was scattered.
With different people, different places. It was written on certain objects.
Yes. And then what you need to do is you need to go back to the traditions. They tell you what happened. And very clearly it says that under Abu Bakr, the first caliph, he had Zayd ibn Thabit. Zayd ibn Thabit was the scribe or the secretary of Muhammad to compile the first recension, the first text of the Quran. That was done between 632 and 634, that 2 years right after Muhammad died. That copy was given to Hafsa, one of the wives of Muhammad, and she put it under her bed, so the tradition tells us, and stayed there. Now let's jump 18 years, between 18 and 20 years to the time of Uthman. We go back to Al-Bukhari, and we go back to volume 6, Akhbar number 509 and 510. When you go to Al-Bukhari, volume 6, 509 and 510, it picks up the story from there. Uthman is the caliph at this time. Hudayfa comes to him and says, what are we going to do when much of the Quran is now being lost at the Battle of Yamama, soon after Abu Bakr, when Abu Bakr was caliph? And many of those who had memorized the Quran had died at the Battle of Yamama. Because of that, those who were dying off were taking the Quran with them. So he goes to Uthman and says, we must write it down so that we will not have different references like the Christians and Jews, different texts. So Uthman goes to Zayd ibn Thabit again. Remember, he's the one that wrote the first recension down. And he says in Akhbar number 509, take Hafsa's copy, that copy that had been retained under the bed, take that and you, along with Zubair, Alas, and Harith, 4 of you, rewrite the Quran. Now, you can see a problem right there. Why do you rewrite something that it was complete to begin with? Why don't you just take Hafsa's copy? Why do they have to rewrite it?
That's right.
And then it says, if you should disagree. How can you disagree? If you're just writing it word for word, if it's the same that's always been in heaven, why would there be any disagreement? If you disagree, write it in the Qurayshi dialect. Immediately you see there's problems here. As an Arabic speaker, you know that a dialectic difference in Arabic has to take vowelization. Because every Arabic word is a combination, is 3 letters that have recombinations on that. And so the root of every Arabic word is 3 letters, and it's consonantal. There is no vowelization. And that's why when you read your newspaper, there's no vowelization there. Why is it when you read a newspaper today that is printed in Egypt and you're Lebanese, you don't have vowelization? Because your dialect would be different. And you include and you impose on it your own vowelization. So whether they're in Morocco or whether they're in Jordan or whether they're in Egypt, they will put different vowelizations depending on their dialect. Vowelization is needed for dialectic differences. Well, when were vowelizations introduced into Arabic?
I don't know.
Not till the late 8th century.
Wow.
So how could you have, in the mid-7th century, a man named Uthman talking about different dialectic differences on a consonantal text?
Couldn't have.
You've got a problem here.
Yeah.
Proving that this shows that this had to be written in the 9th century, and that's exactly when Bukhari wrote this down. Bukhari was actually imposing this onto that argument onto it. That was an argument that would exist in the 9th century, but not the 7th century. Now let's move back. What does he say next? And then he told Zayd ibn Thabit to rewrite the text, if they had any discussion, to make sure that it was in the Qurayshi dialect. And then he said, it says in 510, the next Akbar, it says, he then took all the manuscripts that were remaining and burnt them. Ooh. Can you see the problem? That exposes everything right there.
That's right.
Why do you burn manuscripts?
If there were differences.
Absolutely.
To hide them,
That's right. The only reason you would burn a manuscript is because you want to get rid of the evidence. That means that there was a lot of different manuscripts that existed. It looks like it's quite a few different ones that disagreed with each other. Now, we do know that in the traditions, Dr. Arthur Jeffrey, who is a well-known scholar, has gone back and has looked at all the traditions on the references to the many different manuscripts. And there's tradition after tradition after tradition that speaks about these differences. You can look and see Al-Bukhari, just look at Sahih Muslim and Ibn Dawud, just look at those three compilers of the hadith and look and see what they say. And they say example after example after example of where these different codices. We know of 4 different codices, that means 4 different books, codexes, that became very popular in 4 different cities. They're called the metropolitan codices. There's the Codex of Ubay ibn Ka'b. The Codex of Ubay ibn Ka'b became very popular in Damascus. We know of the Codex of Ibn Masud. The Codex of Ibn Masud became very popular in Baghdad. We know of the Codex of Ibn Musa. That codex became very popular in Basra. And then the codex of that I mentioned earlier, Zayd ibn Thabit. So you have 4 different authors, 4 different codices. None of the 4 agree. And when Dr. Arthur Jeffrey in 1935, when he looked at the disagreements, he found 15,000 disagreements just with those 4 codices.
Wow.
So how could the Muslims claim that this book has never changed? They're not looking at their traditions. Their traditions are very clear that there was parts that were lost, some of it had been changed, others had been added to, and there's reference after reference after reference of the differences just between those 4 codices. We know that Ubay ibn Ka'b's codex and also Ibn Masud's codex had 2 extra surahs. So they had 116 surahs. How can you have 116 when there's only 114 in the Quran that we have today? So these are claims that Muslims make today that they cannot support. You cannot tell me that the Quran that we have in our hand today is the same that was there in the 7th century. And here's the other thing. Here's the big problem. Where are those original codices? Because according to Al-Bukhari, volume 6, number 510, it says that once he had destroyed and burnt those manuscripts, he then sent 1 copy to Basra, 1 copy to Baghdad, 1 copy to Damascus, and retained 1 in Medina. So 4 copies were made of that Uthmanic recension. Where are they?
I don't know.
Ask your Muslim friend next time. Where are those 4 copies? See, we're talking about the 7th century. We're just talking about 1400 years ago. There should be all kinds of examples. You come to London, I'll take you down to the British Library, and I'll show you the entire New Testament from the 4th century, 300 years before this.
So they have no original copies?
Not at all.
Wow.
Now, Muslims try to claim they do.
Okay.
They will come up with 2, and we're going to show them on the screen there. If you look over there, you'll see a copy of one called the top copy. Look at the top copy, and you will see it has a script that's completely different than what we see here. If you notice, this is a much different script. But the one you see in the top copy there, that's there in Istanbul, in Turkey, considered to be one of these 4 Uthmanic recensions. You will notice it has an elongation. It is written in a Kufic script, Abbasid script, which was introduced at a much later period. It has, if you look carefully, you can see medallions on it, and the medallions show versification.
Yes.
Because where medallion, that's where the verse begins. Versification was introduced in the late 8th century. So how can you have all this in a 7th century manuscript? It has justification on either side. That was borrowed from the Christian manuscripts. That was introduced in the early 9th century. So most scholars today would say that the top copy is a 9th century manuscript, not a 7th century manuscript. Now look up there again. You see another one. Here's the Samarkand. The Samarkand is the second one they like to point to. And the Samarkand manuscript, again, you can see there's that elongated script that you find in the top copy. But look, we're going to show you 4 different pages on that. And look at the 4 different pages. It's 4 different styles of writing, showing that it was an amalgamation of different scribes. Again, it has that, it's missing the diacritical marks, but it doesn't have vowelization. proving therefore that it is an early script, but it's not a 7th century manuscript. It again is a 9th century manuscript for the same reason that the Topkapi is. So the two that Muslims like to claim today are really over 100 to 200 years later. So they've got to find a manuscript that's from the 7th century.
And they're unable to do this.
They're not able to do this. Why?
Wow.
Ask any Muslim, where are those 4 manuscripts? Give me one, just one manuscript. Now, in 1975, when they're in Sana'a in Yemen, they were cleaning out the dome of the Sana'a Mosque. They found a trapdoor. They opened the trapdoor and thousands of manuscripts fell to the ground. Now, that's not surprising because when Qurans do get deteriorate, they don't burn them, they don't bury them. They usually just put them up in mosques, the dome mosque, and they leave them there, and they forget them, and these were all forgotten. And as they were going through these different manuscripts, they came across one manuscript they couldn't read. The reason why, it had a text, a script that was very archaic. It didn't have any diacritical marks, no dotting above below the line for showing which consonants they were referring to, and there was no vowelization on them. Plus, there was no medallions to show versification as well. So it had no diacritical marks, no vowelization, and no diacritical marks. And they couldn't read it. They had a hard time. So they brought 2 scholars down from Germany. They flew them down in 1981 to look at this manuscript. These are known as Dr. Gerd Puyn and Dr. von Bothmer, considered to be probably today the world's scholars' authority on archaic Arabic script. They came in 1981 to look at this manuscript, and as soon as they looked at this manuscript, they took pictures of it, put it onto microfilm. The Yemeni government confiscated their microfilms, would not let them see their own microfilms, because they started hearing what they were finding and what they were seeing.
So they got worried.
They did get worried. Now, they did not return those manuscripts to Dr. Puyn or Dr. von Bothmer, who both taught at Saarland University in Saarbrücken in Western Germany until 1997. I went to visit Dr. Gerd Puyn in 1999 in Germany, and he showed me that manuscript. I can't show you them right now, but I want you to look on the screen. I want to just show you 2 pages that I have up there. You notice, here's a page where you see a yellow mark halfway down. Above that is Surah 19.
Okay.
Where that yellow mark is, it jumps to Surah 22. The question you should ask is, what happened to Surah 20 and 21?
That's right.
So obviously when that manuscript was written, and that page you're looking at has been dated to 705 AD. Muhammad died in 632. The Quran was supposedly compiled in 650. So we're talking basically about 50 to 55 years after Muhammad, the recension, Uthmanic recension. Here you see, interesting, look at the script. That script that is on the right-hand side is what we know as Hijazi script. That's the kind of script that would have been in existence when Muhammad was living. The Hijazi script is a 7th century script, and it's also an 8th century script. But it went out of style in the mid-8th centuries. When you look at that, you will see on the right side is a early 8th century 705 script, missing 2 surahs.
Wow.
Look on the left side. See on the left page? There, Surah 20 begins. It's in the wrong place. It's next to it, but it's in a completely different script. Can you see? You can see it visually. You can see it's 2 different scripts. This is a much later. This is an Abbasid script, which was introduced about 50 to 60 years later. So what does that tell you? Well, I know what it tells me. It tells me that we're looking at an evolution of the Quran that still was not complete in 705.
Wow.
Ooh, now that has a huge implication, because if Muslims say the Quran has never been changed, the Quran that we have in our hand today is the same Quran that has existed in heaven since the beginning, well, not beginning, everlasting. Yet here you have a script that shows that even as late as 705, it still was not completed. It still was missing surahs. They're in the wrong places. Then you've got a real damaging, basically a manuscript. Now that page that you're looking at there, and others like it, have been dated to 705. That's proving to be probably the oldest manuscript we have available today. The Yemeni government will not let people look at that manuscript. The Germans are the only ones that have been able to film it, and they only have facsimiles of it because of filming. Isn't it interesting? If this is the oldest Quran in existence, the Yemeni government could be making a mint off this. Why aren't they sending it around for people to look at?
Very interesting, yeah. I mean, they've got to be hiding something.
Well, there's something more that's even more damaging that I'm not permitted to say on television. Because what Gerd Puyn and them are finding, they're going to have to publish it. Once they publish it, then we can go and actually tell you what it is. But it's going to destroy the Quran when it comes out. This is why I thank God we don't have these problems. Because what we're going to do in the next segment, and what I want to do is I want to look at the Bible and ask the same question of the Bible. Do we have manuscript problems? But what we already know is we have seen, let's just review very quickly. We have already seen that the Quran cannot be traced back 1,400 years. There is no manuscript evidence that goes back that far. What's more, They are now finding what they call palimpsests. Palimpsests are fragments of the Quran that when you put under ultraviolet light, you see one script that's underneath another script. It was a writing that had been washed off and rewritten over top. And with ultraviolet light now, in the 21st century, we can now look and see the other writing, and they're separating the two writings. Both of them are proving to be Quranic, but they're completely different references. In fact, there's two different scripts, showing that there's an evolution. This is the first time we've been able to look using modern technology to show that the Quran was evolving in the late 7th century. These palimpsests are from 650, 660, 670, moving up into the Sufyani period, up into Abd al-Malik. And we need to come to Abd al-Malik, because Abd al-Malik, who ruled from 685 to 705, is the man that changes everything. Basically, it's Abd al-Malik that many of your scholars are now pointing to, because he is the second of the Marwanid caliphs under the Umayyad Caliphate, and he is the one that built the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is a beautiful building. You can see a picture of it up there. You can see that beautiful dome. Now, the Dome of the Rock was built for a very interesting reason. It was built to commemorate Muhammad going up to 7 heavens. He went on the back of the winged horse from Medina up to Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem, at that rock, he supposedly was to have gone up to heaven and talked to Allah, and then talked to Moses, and goes back and forth and gets 5 prayers. Now, that's another story. What's interesting is when you go to the Dome of the Rock and you look at the inner ambulatories, the inner parts, the only original part of that building, they have Quranic references up there, but they do not correspond with the Quran we have here.
Really?
In fact, it's fascinating because they don't say anything about that event of Muhammad going up to the 7 heavens. They are all anti-Christian polemics.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to leave that there, because what that is showing us is there, even as late as 691 when that building was built, or 690 when that building was built, you still did not have a Quran that we had, a reference that we have in our hand.